All right, all right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful, occasionally wearying world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host, pretty much per usual. So, what do we got tonight? Well, last night, UFC on ESPN 57, which, you know, not talking about my predictions, but talking about like the feel I got for that card. When I said there was very little here on paper that was going to jump out at you, but I could see what they were trying to do, um, a lot of that actually played out. So we'll go over that. Um, and yeah, 14 fights. Just no. No, 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 no. No, no. Please stop doing that. It's too much. We also have a preview for UFC on ESPN Plus 100. And boy, are they not putting any effort into that particular milestone. We'll get to it. I promise. That is a profoundly mundane to poor card on paper. That's one of the worst cards they've put out this year. On paper. Let me stress that. On paper. In practice, we'll see. But, oof. Just to look at it, that's kind of a dog. That is a dog of a card. And there's some news. One maybe non-story, maybe more important story. We'll just have to see how that goes. And then, yeah, we'll just see what the news has to bring. So that's what we've got. Yeah, I think that's it for me on the preamble. So like, comment, subscribe. You know the deal there. Star rating, written review. Share us around. All that good stuff to help out the program. All right. That's my spiel. Let's get into this, shall we? So, UFC on ESPN 57, we begin, as usual, with the prediction record. And your boy went 9-5. And after watching this card, I did come up with a new rule for myself for these things. This is one of those things you're going to have to trust me on. Like, yeah, I mean, you hear the picks, but I'm putting a caveat on one thing. I've been playing around with, well, maybe I could give myself one or two of these that I reserve the right to change my mind between now and the time the fight starts. I might still tinker with that. But I can tell you the caveat I am going to give myself going forward. I reserve the right to change my pick if a fighter misses weight. Now, doesn't mean I will. And if by the end of the year I have 100% accuracy predicting fights in which one fighter misses weight, then call BS on me. I don't expect that, but I I can tell you just very specifically, as soon as I saw not only that Eduardo Mora had missed, but how she looked weighing in, like, she wasn't going to win that fight. And that's fairly obvious to anyone, I think, who pays enough attention to this kind of stuff. So that's the only one of the. Look, the other ones I got that didn't go my way as far as predictions go. Um, One's annoyed me. I didn't realize how bad, like, Julian Marquez, bless him, he's been in some very dumb, very entertaining fights, but he might be more washed than I thought. Um, Tomar and Dos Santos, I just didn't agree with that decision, but not going to I'll yell about the scoring in particular when we get there. Um, Montana and Lee, that was a weird one. What's the other one I got wrong that I just felt weird about? Hang on. That was wrong. That was wrong. Lee Montana. Oh, Reyes and Jacoby. Did I feel bad? No, I don't. I don't feel too bad about missing that one. I understand why I got it wrong. I understand how that played out. Um, but I don't feel it was incorrect of me to be in a position where I just don't pick Dominic Reyes to really win fights. That might be changing going forward. Might. We'll have to see. I need to see that guy get some consistency back, but um, so yeah, again, 9-5 overall. I'll take it. Um, I would have preferred 10-4, and like I said, the Mora and Denise Gomes fight. If I'd put that rule in place earlier, which I probably should have, to be clear, that one I would have, but I'm not going to change it. That'll be the rule going forward. Not going to post-date that. Okay. So, yeah, 9-5. On the year, that brings me to 161-75 with 3 no contests. No draws yet in the UFC this year. So, still at the moment doing a little better than 2-1. And all I really want is to be better than a coin flip. So, I'm kind of okay with how things are looking at the moment. All right, as for the fights themselves, main event. Nassourdine Imavov defeats Jared Cannonier via TKO punches 134 the fourth round. Um, I don't love the stoppage. I understand it. In real time, I kind of went, It was early. Even in real time, I kind of went, that's a little early. But I could understand where the ref was coming from. Having now rewatched it, that sequence in particular, several times. The clips are all over, the internet, so find them and judge for yourself. I've arrived at the following conclusion. It's actually a little bit worse of a stoppage than I felt in real time, but I still understand where the ref is coming from. And it's important that you understand that how decisions that you disagree with are arrived at, especially if you think they're objectively bad. How do we get there? I can see how we got there on this stoppage. Doesn't mean it's right, just means it's understandable. And too often this is kind of what happens when you overvalue empathy. You think that just because it's understandable and because you can empathize with it, that it becomes more correct. And no, the referee. There were people who compared this to there was one of the worst boxing stoppages you'll ever see. Earlier this year or late last year, I can't remember. But the fight got stopped when fighter A is throwing a flurry at fighter B, and it's all missing. He's slipping it and actively defending. And the referee jumps in. Again, just one of the worst stoppages you'll ever see. People comparing it to that, that's a bit too far there, my guys. I understand you thinking this is a bad stoppage. I don't even disagree with you. But holding this up next to maybe the worst boxing stoppage of the last 3 years, you're pushing that a bridge too far. At least one bridge too far. And I said here I can see what happened. So this was not a terrible fight. I saw some people being fairly, either dismissive or insulting of it, and some people do that on, the internet because that's their shtick. And respect, if that's your shtick, go for it, stick to it. Um, this is a completely forgettable, but acceptably forgettable kind of fight for me. So, first round, these two actually kind of get after it a little bit. Cannonier's relying a bit on his power, but it's not quite getting to Imavov. Imavov's moving fairly well. landing at distance, but a couple of good calf kicks out of Cannonier. Then we do a fair amount of clinching. And Imovov's clinch game is at a point where it's very good defensively, but he's not. It's not that he can't be offensive from there, because he was able to land some decent knees to the body. Pretty good about throwing elbows on the break, too. But if you watch guys with a very high degree of proficiency in the clinch, they don't get stuck there as much as Imavov got kind of stuck there. Now, as the fight wore on, when he kind of figured out some of the habits that Cannonier has there, he was able to disengage a little more reliably. But that's still a developing part of his game. On the feet at distance, he's a handful. He's got pretty good kicks. He's especially kind of good at setting them up. His punches are solid. He's a he's a very good overall fighter. And Cannonier slowed down a bit as this fight kept wearing on. I don't know if he had some kind of an injury or if some of the body stuff from Imavov was maybe getting to him more than you might have thought on first look. My hunch is also the pace. Look, this wasn't a barn burner, partially because these are middleweights. That is, by definition, going to be a more measured pace. Also with a lot of clinching. If you're not conditioned for clinch fighting for prolonged periods of time, it will sap the life out of you. And I'm not saying Cannonier slacks on his conditioning at all, but I just don't know. I don't know how much of that was the game plan from start to finish. Because if it wasn't, that would kind of explain why he faded a bit the longer that kept going on. Cannonier started overall fairly strong, but Imavov started getting a feel for him. He started landing better punches. Especially the longer this went on, the more it was favoring Imavov until he cracks Cannonier with a right hand in the fourth round, hurts him pretty visibly, and is able to string together enough of a flurry to get the ref to step in. And as already mentioned, I think the ref was a little hasty on the stoppage. It was Jason Herzog, and Herzog's a good ref. He's a very good ref. I think what prompted his stepping in is there's a left hook from Imavov, and Cannonier's kind of throwing back. And Cannonier mostly blocks this punch, but his legs are already wobbled, and it kind of gets him tipping over. And if I had to guess, Herzog looked at the way Cannonier was starting to lean and how badly he had been hurt before and thought, he's going down again, I have to stop it. And to be very clear, had Cannonier actually hit the deck, none of us would be complaining about this. I think Herzog just wound up anticipating a little too much because Cannonier didn't hit the deck, but there was a moment when it's early, like how that develops when you start tipping and leaning like that. I can see what he was saying. I really can. So I'm not here to kill him for it. I am here to say I disagree, and I think it was an early stoppage. That's all. I don't know what the official. Let me see if I can. See if the UFC has this. They've had this up recently, where the UFC website has done the scorecards and referee assignments and whatnot for this. So do we have? So going into the fourth. Two judges had it 2-1 for Cannonier. One had it 2-1 for Imavov. I think I was 2-1 Imavov. Round 3 is kind of the one somewhat in dispute there. Cannonier wins the first without too much controversy. Imavov has the second. Again, the third's where it gets a little dicey. The third was close enough that you could have gone either way. I think I went with Imavov, but don't quote me on that. I don't remember that well. Um, After the fight, Imavov wants to come for the belt, called out Sean Strickland. Given that that would be a rematch, I think there's going to be some hesitancy around making that. Strickland also should probably be. Middleweight's just kind of up in the air right now. We got like 4 different things that we need to see how they shake out. We saw Strickland beat Costa. That's one of the things. We still don't know what's up with Dricus and Israel Adesanya. The UFC is, I imagine, leaning heavily towards that. But that doesn't mean it's guaranteed to happen. We've got Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev fighting in the near future. Have to see how that shakes out. There's just a bunch of stuff up in the air in this division right now, and I don't know that Imavov gets that rematch with Strickland right now. That's Pardon me. That's all I'm saying. Tough loss for Cannonier. He was coming off of a non-trivial layoff. The last fight before this was, just about a year, June of last year. He tore his, what was it, his MCL? Yeah, it was MCL. So recovering from the knee injury. He's also what, 39 now? He's 40. He just turned 40. It's middleweight. I don't think he's in any imminent danger of like retiring tomorrow. But this was kind of your, defend your spot and prove you're still title material. And the weird stoppage will help him, but that fight was also kind of not exactly going his way. Imavov was winning the fourth as much as we got of that round. Certainly with as much as he hurt him, was probably going to win that round. And I don't know what Cannonier could have pulled out in the fifth. So he might have. I don't know. I'm just mentioning. At that age, this might have been his crossroads fight in that respect, and the loss, even under those circumstances, does kind of hurt. If Imavov doesn't get a fight with Strickland next, who would make sense for him? This was a pretty significant win for Imavov. Cannonier was ranked, he was in the top 10. Where was he exactly coming into this? He was 4, jeez. I mean, Imavov was 7, so it's not like, that does not leave a whole lot of options if assuming he just takes over 4th. Marvin Vettori's still kind of doing something. Brendan Allen. If he does just take over 4th, the only guys above him will be the champion, so Dricus, Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya, and Robert Whittaker. And we got to know what's up with Whittaker and Chimaev. He might. I mentioned the Strickland fight seemed unlikely. Depending on how other stuff shakes out, I'm going to retract that just a little bit. I still don't know if it's the most likely, but it's actually more possible than I gave it credit for on just first blush at looking over that division. That division badly needs some turnover too. But middleweight is not the only division for whom that is a problem. Alrighty. Co-main event. Dominic Reyes got his first win since 2019. Knocks out Dustin Jacoby with some punches. There was a knee in there for good measure. 2 minutes of the first round. Some decent enough body kicks out of Reyes. He got tagged and got a little bit hurt, but Jacoby got a little bit overeager trying to finish him off, and Reyes with some decent blocking just snuck in a left hand that was inside the right hand Jacoby was throwing, cracked him on the jaw and hurt him. Um, Feel good moment if you care about Dominic Reyes, I guess. And afterwards, you're like, yeah, the win feels good. I still think I'm the best light heavyweight in the world, to which I laugh. Look, I'm not trying to leave that man on the side of the road dead at this point. Um, this win was very, very necessary. Had he lost this one, that's 5 in a row. And some of those, John Jones, one in that fight, you could argue he won it. Two, it's John Jones. Then, okay, Jan Blachowicz beat him for the belt. Then he had a crazy war with Yuri, and yeah, he got knocked out, but the Ryan Spann one was the really troubling loss, for being honest. So this one, like, if he'd lost this one, you probably would have had to, like, just leave him completely in the rearview mirror. So much needed win for him. Alex Pereira would still smoke him. Oh, I kind of hate saying that about. I don't know that. Look, would you favor him in a rematch with either Blachowicz or Yuri? Because I wouldn't at this point. But he got a needed win. As long as they don't try to throw him back into like the deepest end of that at the top, let him rebuild for a little bit, guys. We don't need to rush him. Um, I still think he's gonna have a tough road if he wants to get back towards the title spot, but this was a glimmer of life in a career that was on the verge of having the plug pulled in a lot of real ways. Bantamweights, Raul Rosas Jr. defeated Ricky Tercios via rear naked choke, 222 of the second. Some fun scrambles in the first round, but honestly, there's not a lot here to talk about. And I just... I don't know. Is there anything? Listen, there were some fun scrambles. Some good back takes. Ricky Tercios reminding everyone that there's a bit that gets repeated by commentary in the UFC about how to escape the body triangle. And it's basically rotate so the part with the lock, so where your foot is trapped under your own knee. You're doing a body triangle. Put that on the ground and that'll fix your problems. That's like saying ankle lock someone when they cross their legs putting hooks in. It's not that it's impossible, it's actually just a lot more gimmicky than every instructor has ever yelled at you about it and has told you. Look, they tell you not to do it not because, oh, there's an ankle lock there. Like, sure, there kind of is, but it actually inhibits your skill development. Because if you think I can cross my legs here and that will give me some degree of control, it does, but you lose. If you lose that then and you don't know how to properly use hooks to control and ride, you're completely lost. Develop the appropriate skill. That's what they're trying to convey when they yell at you about don't do that. Also, if those get above the hips, if you've ever seen someone cross their ankles, like either if they go too far down, you can potentially get ankle locked, or if the hips get above like the fulcrum, the points of control, it's easy to spin in. It's also easy if it's too high. Like that actually requires some very precise positioning of your legs. But the point being, putting the body triangle on the ground, like that's putting pressure on the ankle. Like, you're advocating for gimmicky ankle locks to get out of a body triangle. I implore you all, look up Gordon Ryan's entire series on escaping body triangles and work from there. It's just weird. But Tercios got out of the body triangle. Nearly had a choke going on Rosas in the first, lost it. Decently paced fight. I'm not out here to complain about it. This is fun enough, but it's There was a time when this is the kind of fight you would find more on the regional scene between guys still developing their skills. Now it's padding out the UFC machinery cards. Uh, I don't know of a better way to phrase that. Middleweight, Bruno Ferreira knocks out, good grief, Dustin Stoltzfus with a spinning back elbow. So Stoltzfus actually is doing some pretty good work on Ferreira initially. Ferreira's got power, but he's not great off the back foot. And his delivery system is fairly... It's not that he never throws anything other than the basics, but when you're watching him just kind of throw his 1-2 or just wing the right hand, like that's borderline rudimentary stuff there in a lot of ways. And Stoltzfus really kind of had him pegged. But when there's a danger, especially in MMA, once you think you've got somebody figured out, it makes the unexpected more dangerous if you're not cognizant of it. I mean, if you need another example of this, the fight between Israel Adesanya and Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum in the 4th round catches Adesanya with a head kick that he had, I don't think, shown all fight. It's been a while since I've rewatched that whole fight. But Adesanya just had a really good read on the vast majority of everything Gastelum was doing. When that happens, you need to do something unexpected, and hopefully the other guy is a bit too complacent. Adesanya got head kicked, and to his credit, like tried to no-sell it, wound up surviving, and then had his big rally in the 5th, obviously. But here, Stoltzfus just got a little bit complacent on some of his entries and expecting just these kind of looping punches. And Ferreira landed a back elbow, hurt Stoltzfus, backed him up, tried the flying knee, tried a couple of punches, eventually just settled on throwing another spinning back elbow. And it landed right on the left eye of Stoltzfus. Dropped him, got the stoppage, obviously. As soon as you saw the damage to that, you knew, like, that's a broken orbital bone, bare minimum. Stoltzfus actually took to, I think it was Instagram, and said, yeah, broken orbital, broken eye socket, something in there, and some pretty severe nerve damage, apparently. So, yikes. All for pittance, I imagine. Oy. So, good enough win for Ferreira. He was struggling in that fight. I mean, pulled it out. Props to him, but there's some maturation of his skill set that and sophistication, more importantly, that definitely needs to come along. Middleweight Zachary Reese knocked out Julian Marquez in 20 seconds. There was a lot of open stance fights on this card. A lot of Southpaw versus Orthodox. This was one of them. Reese lands a body kick, throws a left hand to follow up that's mostly blocked, but it pushes Marquez towards Reese's right, and then he throws this kind of sweeping right uppercut / shovel hook. Goes right under Marquez's guard, catches him on the chin, drops him. Yeah, not much else to say about that. Good win for Reese, and yeah, there's a lot I appreciate about Marquez, and I'm going to say something that might be construed as negative. I don't mean it that way. There's something kind of endearing about a guy who will bring the like meathead / dumb fun energy to a fight, and Marquez kind of does that. But he's had some health problems, and he's been in a few like serious brawls. I wonder if he might be a bit more shop worn than I was initially giving credit to. Welterweight. Okay, if I'm gonna pat myself on the back about one of these predictions where I got an underdog and got it right, um, Punahele Soriano defeating Miguel Baeza via unanimous decision, 30-27, and then two 30-25s. The 30-25 seems a little. I gave 30-20 not giving Soriano a 10-8 third is just, I think, flatly wrong, especially on like rewatch. That Baeza just in the first two rounds, I think he was active enough off of his back, and he had a couple of pretty decent submission attempts in both of those rounds. Enough to stave off the 10-8. If you're being generous, the second could be 10-8. I think that's the one that was. In fact, let me double check. Because I have access to this now. Huh. Two judges gave Tercios the first round. That tracks. I think I did. Those didn't get out of the first. Here we go. Yeah, in both cases, it was the second and third that were 10-8s for Sal D'Amato and Derek Cleary. Second, once again, just a little, maybe a touch generous. There was a pretty decent armbar attempt from Baeza in the second round that just enough, I thought, to stave off a 10-8, given that Soriano couldn't quite mount a lot of ferocious ground and pound. But that's just my position. Third round, absolutely. Um, the layoff for Baeza, I think, was a pretty big problem. Which is the reason I picked Soriano. Soriano dropping from middleweight to welterweight and immediately becomes a coachable fighter instead of just a face-forward brawler. Just was able to get Baeza down and work comfortably on top, landed enough ground and pound. He set the middleweight record, I think, for most strikes landed in the fight here, surpassing Neil Magny when Magny beat Hector Lombard. Really tough comeback for Baeza after, I think he mentioned he had like Rhoda. He's been dealing with injuries and some other like infections and illnesses and whatnot, so tough welcome back. There was a time when I thought pretty highly of Baeza, but just didn't quite pan out when it was all said and done. He beat Matt Brown, but there were some points in that fight when he struggled a bit, and I think a lot of people read the tape on that correctly, and he's just kind of struggled to get out of the block since then. Uh, Pretty solid overall, and nothing that's gonna stick out in your mind necessarily, apart from these statistical bits. But yeah, he set a few records here. So most significant ground strikes landed in a bout in UFC history. Certainly welterweight at 136. Might also be UFC overall. And second most total strikes landed in a UFC welterweight bout. Wonder what's first. Total strikes in any UFC welterweight fight. Huh. Might have to look that up. Highest significant strike differential in a UFC welterweight bout. He landed 137 more significant strikes than Baeza did. And if we go to total strikes, it's even higher. It's plus 309. He did a lot of work from top position. Showed off what he might be more capable of at welterweight. Curious to see what he does there going forward. Only 31. Only 31. So, get the weight cut figured out. Something to pay attention to, maybe. Feel bad for Baeza, man. He's also only 31. But this ended like a 2+ year layoff for him. Last time out, he got knocked out by Andre Fialho. Uh, yeah, so as mentioned before, he stops Matt Brown in the second round, actually, of their fight in 2020. But Brown has some success. He follows that up by beating Takashi Sato. And then Santiago Ponzinibbio in 2021 was a very legitimate contender, underappreciated, and he beat Baeza pretty thoroughly over 3 rounds. Chaos Williams stopped him. That was a real bad loss. Then Fialho, and then big layoff, and now this loss. Um, it's a rough spot for him, man. Rough spot for a guy who at one time showed a lot of potential, but unrealized. The grave sites of MMA are littered with people who had unrealized potential. That was your main card. A couple of things, if you don't mind. So the prelims have one finish on them, and only one finish on them. The main card had only one decision, which was nice. The runtime for this event overall was still quite long. And main event obviously went into the fourth round. But when I mentioned I I saw what they were going for here. They were going for a main card at least that was maybe not the most consequential rankings-wise fights, but that had a high probability of being at least somewhat entertaining. And for the most part, I think they got that. Nothing. I think the only thing going on my year-end potential lists is Fajera's elbow, but if all you watched was the main card of this, I don't think you had a bad time. I think it's mostly forgettable content rather than a very significant athletic competition, but that's kind of what the UFC does these days, is just churn out week over week content. So on the prelims, Ludovic Klein defeated Thiago Moises via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. This was actually a pretty decent fight. Klein at lightweight has turned out to be kind of a problem. He's fast. He's pretty darn athletic. He's got quick hips, quick kicks, pretty decent power. He dropped Moises with a left hand in the first round. Took him down at a few different points, just kind of because he could. Almost got knee barred, but got out of it because he's pretty darn good. I don't think Klein's lost at lightweight in the UFC yet. No, he's got a draw with Jai Herbert. But this was a step up for him. His previous run to this point at lightweight comes in at he comes in at featherweight, stops Shane Young, loses to Michael Trizano, which is a rough loss. Trizano is you may have even forgotten that Trizano exists or was on the UFC roster. Gets anacondaed by Nate Landwehr. He was winning that fight, but Landwehr just gutted through a tough couple of rounds, kept a pace that Klein couldn't match, and then got him in the third. Moves back to lightweight. He had been at lightweight a little bit earlier outside the UFC. Beats Devontae Smith, beats Mason Jones, draw with Jai Herbert, beats Ignacio Bahamondes, beats AJ Cunningham, and now beats Thiago Moises. He's someone at lightweight to take seriously. Welterweight, our only finish on the prelims, but Carlos Prates, good grief, my man. He murdered Charles Radke with a knee to the body, 4:47 of the first round. I'm glad I listened to the odds makers on that one. Prates just had a couple of things going for him. One, laser-like straight left hand. He's southpaw. Bothered Radke with that fairly early. A lot of good forward pressure. And once he kind of had Radke off his game, the hand fighting from Prates, especially the lead hand fighting, was really good. It leads directly into the finish. So he tags him with a straight left, gets him against the fence. at least with his back leg to the fence. Reaches out and starts hand fighting, gets a hold of the wrist. This is not news. That what I'm about to say is not in any way, shape, form, or fashion revelatory about fighting, especially in MMA, but if you just let somebody get a grip on you, you're having a bad time. So he's got that lead hand now. He's got it gripped, and he kind of has it pinned to his body almost, like he's got it that much pushed into Radke. And Prates shows the left hand. Well, Radke doesn't want to get hit with that thing again, so his backhand, his right hand, kind of comes up like to block it, and he does. There's a really like half-hearted punch that Prates throws there, and their hands kind of touch. But the point was to get the right hand up out of proper defensive position, and with the lead hand pinned kind of against your chest or shoulder, and your right hand up top blocking a punch that you think your liver's wide open, and Prates with this murderous knee to the body drops him like a sack of potatoes instantly. Frequently, when you see someone get hit in the liver, it takes half a second. It's like, boom, and you kind of go, that sucks, and then, oh no, that really sucks. When they go down right away, like they've been stabbed, I've seen this a couple of times. What's the other one that comes to mind? Overeem did it at one point. I forget to who. There was a really gnarly one from, I want to say, it was Massaranduba, Francisco Trinaldo, and oh, who was that? Who was that guy? He did it too. Double check this real fast. Because if I even got that half of it right. Evan Dunham. There we go. It was Evan Dunham. Another guy who had a fair amount of potential at one point or another. I think he's retired. He hasn't fought since 2020 after he got choked out by Burns. Yeah, he overextended throwing either a jab to the body or a left hand. I can't remember, but one of those two. I want to say it was a jab because he's southpaw. And Trinaldo just times this knee to the body that instantly folds him up and drops him. That kind of a thing. Yeah, this was a... I should probably put this on the list, if we're being honest. I will, actually. When I'm done with this, I'll put that on my list. This was a... Oof. When you fold somebody up instantly with that, yeah, you've done something wonderfully set up and just crushed him with it. Oy. Bantamweight Brad Katona defeated Jesse Butler via unanimous decision, 230-27 to 30-26. That's a little generous. Katona just got one takedown around, I think, got on top and just held it. Did enough to avoid being stood up. Not a great fight. Montana De La Rosa defeated Andrea Levy, a split decision, 29-28. Mostly whatever. This was every women's MMA fight you've ever seen. Daniel Marcos beat John Castaneda via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Started better than he finished, did Marcos. Still obviously won every round. Had a fair amount of success early. Really good right hand, some really powerful kicks. Very good at managing the distance. Technically, Castaneda, I believe, had a reach advantage. But Marcos had the read on the spacing. And when you've got the read on that, you're the one controlling distance, you can do some damage, and really solid overall performance from Marcos. Marcos starting to switch from prospect to contender, and that's a rough transition, but if you can pull it off, he's, 16-0-1 now? Is there no contest in there? No contest. 16-0 with one no contest, I believe. Yeah, he might be a player at that division. Denise Gomes defeated Eduardo Mora via split decision. There was a 29-28 for Mora, which, frankly, I don't quite get. And then two 30-27s for Gomes. When Mora missed weight, I knew that she wasn't going to win this fight after that. She just couldn't muster a lot of physicality and couldn't get takedowns into any kind of real control position and just didn't have a whole lot on the feet for Gomes. Not a great fight. Not sure I get going 29-28 for Mora. I might have given Mora the second. Um, my thought on that one being that's the round where she had the back, and that was the round where Gomes' striking seemed the least consequential. Uh, Bantamweights again. Taylor Lapilus defeated Cody Stamann via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Good stuff from Lapilus. Another fighter with a very good control of distance, good understanding of his own range. Stamann really struggled to get anything going. And kicking off the night, we had Puja Tomar defeating Hayani Dos Santos via split decision. There was a 30-27 each way, and then a 29-28 for Tomar. 30-27 for Tomar is a big no for me here. Big no. Was it the third that I think there's no way she should have won? I think it was that. Might have been the second. I don't remember. There was one round in particular that I went, for the record, 30-27 for Dos Santos. Did you not watch the first round all that closely? That, I don't object to Tomar winning necessarily. I don't object to even, this fight had enough stuff going on that I'm not even upset that it was a split decision. The 30-27s each direction it's always weird. And this was, more importantly, this was not a fight where all three rounds were that close. Tomar sort of making history of being the first. UFC made a big point, like this is the first Indian fighter to win in the UFC. I have to I think Arjun Buller, he's Indian. His parents are from India. I think he was born in Canada, technically, so that might be true. I don't know. Wasn't it one of those Road to the UFC guys? Might have lost. Either he won in the finals, but they don't count that as being in the UFC, or he lost and then got signed anyway and then lost his next fight. I remember that. That because he was the guy who was winning a fight and then his opponent started barking at him and messed with his head and got him out of there in the third. Can't remember his name, but I remember that scene. I don't remember if he won his season of Road to UFC or not, but if he did, then they're just discounting it because the Road to UFC finals, despite taking place on a UFC event, do not have either guy signed to the promotion, and at that point, it seems we're being way too nitpicky with this distinction. If UFC promoted the fight and it was held on a UFC event, that should be the end of it, my opinion. Well, that was the card. 14 fights is just too many. And the prelims had 5 minutes of overrun. The main card was supposed to start at 8 p.m. Eastern, and at 8:05, the broadcast has to welcome in everyone who's watching other stuff because we're going to be on ESPN proper, and we're wrapping up the we had I think the last round to go for that for Klein and Moises. It's just too many fights, man. You're just asking for trouble. All right, there was no fight of the night awarded. Fair. Performances went to Raul Rosas Jr., Bruno Ferreira, Zachary Reese, and Carlos Prates. I'm not arguing with any of that. I am not going to argue with any of that. That all seems very fair to me. So yeah, my full report, MMAZone411mania.com. I thank everyone who read that, be that live or after the fact, because we're gonna be, doing the darn thing again this coming Saturday. So, must adapt. Sorry. Okay. UFC and ESPN Plus 100 preview. Needed to type a thing out there. Sorry, guys. Wrong button. Sorry, wrong website page. Okay, here we go. There it is. How did that get bumped ahead too? Hang on. Is that just weird? No, there's just something weird happening. Alright, never mind. Okay. UFC and ESPN Plus 100. This is... It's just kind of, I mentioned already, man. If you're kind of like me, I like the main event. I really do. I wish the co-main event was the original fight. Unfortunately, it is not. There's another flyweight fight on the main card I'm kind of interested in. There's several flyweight fights on this card. Good grief. There's 4. The main event of the prelims I actually think is a pretty good fight. But on paper, this is just... It is not going to jump off the page at anyone, and I don't think the UFC expects all that much out of it. This is also, in addition to being UFC on ESPN Plus 100, the 100th event the promotion will host in the Apex, which will still look like crap. So, WWE had one of their NXT branded events from the Apex. Actually, it wrapped a few hours before I started recording this. And it actually looked like a okay venue when the WWE production staff got in there and went, okay, here's where we're going to put all the bleachers, here's where the ring's going to be, and we'll make it feel like there's fans, there will be fans, and we can kind of make it feel like there's an actual atmosphere in here and the whole 9 yards. And you know the UFC's not going to keep that configuration because, of course, they're not. They just rather do what they've been doing because they have no incentive to change, no matter how much the product suffers for the viewer at home, because they don't care. They don't care who watches these things, if anyone. They care that the ESPN check clears. That's it. All they care about when it comes to these ESPN Plus cards. And it's very obvious. Oh, last thing about, I assume it's going to happen again on this card. There was an advertisement that was running on ESPN Plus. I don't know if it was the same. I don't know if the commercials are always the same for ESPN Plus versus ESPN on broadcast. I kind of assume they're the same, but I might be mistaken about that. Just my disclaimer there. There was this god-awful commercial for Snapchat that was airing every commercial break, especially between rounds, like every time between rounds. Here's this. It looked terrible. It almost looked like one of those things you would like flash on the screen to try and induce someone to a violent, mindless seizure or a state of homicidal rage that they wake up from like 3 days later, 2 states over, and don't understand anything that just happened to them. It was awful. And it kept playing and it kept playing, and I was getting to the point by the end of the night where something bad might happen if this keeps going. They don't even really care about the advertisers. Like, hey, put on whatever you want. We don't care. Your check clears. You'll be here, and that's all that matters to us. And, yeah, that's kind of where we are with that. All right. Fights. Fights themselves. Main event, much as I'm going to kind of laugh at / ignore a lot of this card. The main event is pretty good. We have flyweights Alex Perez and Tatsuro Taira I've been a pretty big believer in Tyra's for a little bit now. Both gentlemen are ranked at flyweight. Tyra only 13. They've been bringing him along kind of slowly. This is his big shot because Perez is ranked 5th, which constitutes a large ranking disparity. Perez has been doing okay. He just broke a 3-fight losing streak. In fairness to that streak, one of those was a flyweight title fight with Davis and Figueiredo. Then he lost to Pantoja, who became champion. Then he dropped a unanimous decision to Muhammad Makayev that I thought he was doing well in, and had that been 5 rounds instead of 3, I think he would have won. He rebounded from all that by knocking out Matthews Nicolau back in April. Tyra is undefeated, 15-0. 4-0 in the UFC? 5-0? 5-0 in the UFC. He's had some good wins, has Tyra, but big step up in competition here. I mean, the best guy he fought before this, the only guy whose name you might know is CJ Vergara. I don't know, maybe, I think Edgar Chavez is probably the best fighter, because Vergara is a little bit washed. But big step up in class. Alex Perez, far and away the best guy he's fought. He's had a few striking issues, and Perez is gonna test that. That's not really. That's potentially a weakness here. The overall grappling game is kind of Tyra's bread and butter. That's where he does his best work. My hunch is to lean Tyra here, but I can absolutely see how Perez wins this fight. If he's able to land, it can be a problem. Tyra, young guy, is the other thing here. Perez is 32, kind of right at at the physical prime. It starts decaying after 32. Tyra only 24. So you could very, very easily get a case here of seasoned veteran proving to the young, talented guy, not quite yet. That is absolutely on the table here. The 5 rounds is another sort of X factor. Tyra has never been 5 rounds. He's been in title fights, but one of those was at Shudo, and I think they have a slightly different round structure. He's actually fought at strawweight and bantamweight too. I mean, bantamweight I don't think is a good fit for him in the UFC, but him making 115 is not actually that surprising, especially younger in his career. So 5 rounds. That's a question mark. Perez, I don't think he's ever been 5, but he's been actually once earlier in his career. See, back in 2015, he went all 5 in a flyweight title fight, which he won. In the UFC, he's been scheduled for 5. Twice? Title fight at 255. Then, yeah, the Nicolau fight was the main event for that fight night. So, scheduled for 5 twice in the UFC. So, that little bit of an X factor. I'm going to be okay leaning Tyra. But I'm kind of just dead on with the odds here. The odds where I can see them are minus 180 for Tyra, plus 150 for Perez. That strikes me as about right. Very close fight in a lot of respects. Middleweight, your co-main event. This was supposed to be Ikram Aliskerov and Andre Muniz. I actually was quite interested in that fight. Unfortunately, Muniz had to pull out. In steps Antonio Tricoli. And I actually think fairly highly of Aliskerov. And I have no problems picking him here whatsoever. I would have had to think about him and Muniz. Muniz had a rough couple of fights, but still there's a lot very good about his game. I would have had to think about that one. Not saying Tricoli is incapable of pulling a rabbit out of his hat. That would be a bridge too far. But Aliskerov is a heavy favorite, and for very good reason. Featherweights next. We have Timothy Kwamba and Lucas Almeida. Let me double check something here. So Kwamba, 8-2, I believe lost his UFC debut. Yes, he did to Balagioki. Split decision. I think I agreed with Oki getting it, but not the world's worst fight. Lucas Almeida, 14-3. Only 1-2 in the UFC though. One is UFC debut back in 2022. Had a boatload of fights fall out. Jeez. Fights with Zubair Tukhugov, Andre Fili, and Hakeem Dawodu all fell out. Then he lost to Pat Sabatini. Had a fight with William Gomez fall out. Then fought Andre Fili and came up on the wrong end of that. So he's in kind of a rough spot, actually. There's some pretty decent stuff about his game. Kwamba dropping to featherweight here. First time in the UFC, at least. That is kind of an X factor. It's a rough stretch for Almeida. Kwamba fighting as ably as he did up a weight class, I'm going to go with Kwamba. Not completely sold on that, but that's going to be my pick. Bantamweights, we have Douglas Silva de Andrade and Miles Johns. Douglas, that dude's been around forever, man. Not only does he have 35 fights, his pro debut was in 2007. He came over to the UFC in 2014. And he's been kind of more wins than losses in the UFC, but kind of a just barely thing. His UFC career goes like this. Loses to Zubair Tukhugov, beats Cody Gibson, beats Henry Baronis, loses to Rob Font, beats Marlon Vera, loses to Piotr Jan. Jan beat the crap out of him. His corner was right to stop that one. Beats Henan Barao. Barao well past his sell-by date there. Loses to Lerone Murphy. Beats Gaetano Perello. Beats Sergey Morozov. That was a wild fight. Loses to Said Nurmagomedov. Beats Cody Stamann. And he's kind of bounced between featherweight and bantamweight throughout the course of that. The question in this one is really about Miles Johns. Johns he's got a good record. Only 2 losses in the UFC to Mario Bautista and John Castaneda. He had a no contest in there somewhere with Dan Argueta. Coming off a win over Cody Gibson. Then the no contest. He also beat Vince Morales. He's getting a technical step up in competition here. Johns has had cardio issues. Of course, so has Silva. The age is kind of a thing. Johns being just kind of moderately effective everywhere, but never really overwhelming is You kind of need something serious to threaten Silva with. This is a real close fight according to the odds. I mean, we're talking like near coin flip territory here, depending on where you look. What's going to be my deciding factor here? Johns is 30. How old is Silva de Andrade? 38. That might be it. I don't know. Johns has just kind of been... This is a spot for him to definitely start proving he's ready to level up his game. I'm actually going to go with de Andrade here. And more than prepared for the bottom to fall out on that guy at almost 40, but especially at bantamweight. But Johns has been, he's just kind of been so middle of the road, you know? All right, flyweights next. Asu Amabayev and Jose Johnson. Jose? Yeah, Jose. So Amabayev, 19-2. 2-0 in the UFC? Yes, sir. Good win in his debut over Ode Osborne. Struggled a little with CJ Vergara. Still got the win. But hasn't lost since 2017. One of his losses to Tiger Ulanbekov, who's also in the UFC right now. Memon Mamedov is the other one. Other than that, again, long winning streak. Yeah, 15 fights. Which is certainly not easy. Johnson. Lobo Solitario. What is it with people in the assumption that lone wolves are stronger? They're usually dead. Wolves live in packs for reasons. He's 16-8 overall, sorry. He's what? 1-1 in the UFC. Lost to Damon Blackshear. He got twisted. Rebounded by beating Chad and Helliger. I don't have much of a reason to pick against Almabayev here. Let me see something very quickly about this. Sorry, there's just a spelling issue here. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Yeah, I'm very okay going with Almabayev here. He's looked pretty good so far. Might have some cardio issues to iron out, but that's not uncommon for guys when they first get to the UFC. The generally higher level of competition demands a different management of your energy systems. So, you see that with a lot of younger guys who just will adjust a few things in training and then not have that problem going forward. Let's see, the bantamweights, Brady Heastand and Garrett Armfield. Do we have a finalized bout order for this? Yeah, we do. Okay. A couple of guys with weird symbols tattooed on their chests. Kind of a tough one here. Well-matched fight in a lot of respects. Armfield 10-3. 2-1 in the UFC. Yeah, lost to David Onama, rebounded by beating Toshiomi Kazama and then Brad Katona. That Katona win was actually a pretty decent one for him. Then he stands 7-2. 2-0 in the UFC? 2-1. Right. Split decision loss to Ricky Tercios. Since then, he's beaten Fernie Garcia and Danal Batgari. Been out of action for over a year. Talking about 14 months. Fights fell out with Damon Blackshear and Rinya Nakamura. I'm thinking this is Armfield. Armfield's dealt with, he stands mostly a wrestler. Not exclusively, but like mostly. And Armfield's fought off some other wrestlers, so yeah, we're going with Armfield. Okie dokie. Next. Well, that's your main card. And not jumping off anybody's page at you there. If that, if Aliskerov and Muniz had held together, would have done a lot to add some interest and depth to that card. Anyway, prelims. Flyweights, Tiger Ulanbekov and Joshua Van. Really good fight, actually. Really well matched. Ulanbekov had a 4-1 in the UFC. 1-2, lost to Tim Elliott. A little bit of an upset there. Rebounded with 2 wins, 2 finishes over Nate Maness and Cody Durden. Joshua Van's actually been one of the surprising, like, standout flyweight prospects recently. 10-1, 8-fight winning streak, 3-0 in the UFC. Vicious body puncher, especially for flyweight. Had some fights fall out this year thus far, actually. 3 of them. Louis fights with Louis Rocha, Sumar Darji, and then Tatsuro Taira all fell out for one reason or another. He might actually, I might have to put him down as one of my like worst luck of the year guys potentially. Like, let me do that. I mean, he might easily just. You have 3 fights fall out in the first half of the year that will usually get you my attention in that respect. So we'll do that. And we'll see how this fight goes. I mean, if something bad happens to him in the fight, then that would actually put him very high on that list of potentials. Anyway, good body puncher, good puncher in general, good pressure. The wrestling from Ulanbekov is going to be a real problem for him and for a lot of this division. And again, Ulanbekov, if he can't get the takedown, that's going to be interesting. That very well matched fight here. I approve of this matchmaking. And a lot of places, I don't mind Ulanbekov as a favorite, but they've got him. They've got Van in some cases as a 2-1 underdog. I'm just gonna say this. That's asking for trouble. Not saying I don't agree that Ulanbekov should be the favorite. I do, but I don't know that he's that big a favorite in practical terms. I'm still going with him, but if you're looking for an underdog to throw some money at, Van is not the worst one to do that on this card. Also at flyweight, Jimmy Flick and Nate Maness. Maness, kind of a rough go in the UFC. 3-2. 4-2, excuse me. Wins over Johnny Munoz, Luke Standers, Tony Gravely. That was at bantamweight. Since moving to flyweight, lost to Ulanbekov. Beat Mateus Mendonça. That was actually a pretty... I think a lot of people did not expect him to win that fight. Flick has struggled since coming back from a pseudo-retirement. Flick 17-7, 2-2 in the UFC overall. Coming off a win over Malcolm Gordon that broke a 2-fight losing streak. I tend to think Nate Maness is better than Malcolm Gordon. I think I'm going. I appreciate Jimmy Flick's game, but there's some decision making that he has strategically that I think will favor Maness. And Flick's chin is fairly questionable. See, welterweights, Josh Quinlan and Adam Fugit. That's an interesting one. It's a really well-matched fight. Um, Sorry, you are listed out of order over here. Quinlan is 6-2 on a two-fight losing streak. There's a 6-2 with one no contest. Excuse me. 1-2 in the UFC. Losses recently to Trey Waters and Danny Barlow. That knockout loss he suffered to Barlow was pretty bad. Barlow kind of just carved him up. But Fugit, 9-4. 1-2 in the UFC. Losses to Michael Morales and Mike Malott. Sandwich a win over Yusaku Kinoshita. Question is, how much got taken out of Quinlan in that last fight? It's a very real question. Two younger guys. Let me go with Quinlan, but this is a kind of a coin flip one in a lot of respects. All right. Women's flyweight next. Carly Judas and Gabriela Fernandez. What do we have? So Judice. I don't know if you want the last name of Judas. I'll have to see how she pronounces it. Only 3-1. How did she get here so early? It's women's flyweight, and yeah, that's fair. Lost a split decision on the Contender Series. Got a contract anyway, I imagine, or she's stepping in on short notice here, one way or the other. Apparently she lost to Ernesta Carrascate. Okay, I vaguely remember her UFC debut. 'Cause she's very tall, very long, and lost the first two rounds, and actually like kind of started coming on at the end. She's Lithuanian and used to be like a swimmer. Gabriela Fernandez, 8-3, 0-2 in the UFC. Losses to Jasmine Jasdavicius and Teresa Bleda. Huh. Feels a little bit like the last shot for Fernandez here, doesn't it? I I don't know that I can pick anyone as junior in their career as Judas is. Only 4 fights. There could be a lot of improvement there, but there's also a real lack of seasoning for the vast majority of people with that record. So let me go with Fernandez. It's a Gabriella, but I need the last name. Okay, go with Fernandez. Next up, we have Yeka Seragi and Weston Wilson. Sorry, that's Jeka. He's Indonesia. I think they do the ya for the J. To double check that, I can't remember specifically. Um, yeah, okay, so yeah, there was an Indian fighter who won in a UFC event because Anshul Jubli beat him to win that road to UFC Season 1, but wasn't a contracted fighter at the time, and then Jubli had that other loss. Okay. Knew that would come right back around in my head. Saragi coming off a win over Lucas Alexander, stopped him in the first round. Wilson, slightly by contrast. He is 16-9, two-fight losing streak, 0-2 in the UFC. Losses to Joe Anderson Brito, not going to hold that against him, and Jean Silva. Quick look over it. Oh, right. The guy who takes 18 years to walk to the UFC in the Apex Centers. That guy. Might be a slightly softer bit of matchmaking here for Saragi. I don't mean easy. I just mean sometimes they will throw bad fights the direction of fighters. I don't think this is throwing a bad fight at Saragi at all. I think this is Saragi. Yeah, yeah. I don't mind. I don't mind picking him here. Okay, what do we got next? Almost done. Strawweight. Josephine Knudsen and Julia Polastri. I'm going to assume Polastri until I hear it pronounced. And yes, that is Julia. She is from Brazil. I think this is her UFC debut. 12-3, 4-fight winning streak. Not really anything to sneeze at. Yeah, coming off a win in her second Contender Series appearance. Had two other fights fall through this year. This fight with Knudsen and then Stephanie Luciano. Okay, so that's not a bad setup to have coming into UFC debut. Knudsen undefeated, 7-0. Won her UFC debut. She beat Marnik Mann. Another fighter who just desperately wants atomweight in the UFC. Hmm. This could be an interesting one. Pilastri's got more experience overall. Knudsen wasn't exactly setting the world on fire against Mann. The odds like Knudsen. Hmm. Am I going to buck the trend here? Have I picked a legitimate underdog yet? I don't think I have. I mean, some of these are self-evidently not fights where you pick the underdog. You know what? Let me throw an underdog. Let me throw an underdog pick in here. I don't think it's unfair to pick Pilastri. All right. And if I'm wrong about that one, then so be it. I don't care that much. If it comes down to it and it's one pick that ultimately throws me into the red when the year's done, I will curse my past self, and kicking off everything, we have featherweights Melquiel Costa and Shaila Nurdanbeke. Um, I'm gonna pick Costa here. I don't dislike Nurdanbeke. 3-2 in the UFC. Coming off a loss to Steve Garcia though, that was kind of rough. Costa lost his UFC debut, but I believe that was up at lightweight. He's back at featherweight now, 20-7. Lost to Steve Garcia actually. Jeez, that's rough. Hmm. This is not as cut and dry as you might think. I do think featherweight's the better weight class for Costa overall. He's very long for the class. Um, I'm still going with Costa, but I actually have a bit more and have a bit more of a think about that one. And that's the card. So UFC on ESPN Plus 100, the 100th UFC event from the Apex warehouse as well. All that good stuff. Saturday, MMA Zone of 411mania.com. That's where I'll be. I will be covering that particular event, start to finish, like I always do. Actually, there's an event this month I'm not going to be able to do live. I mean, no one else is going to do it at all, so I'll just do it after the fact. But I think the one on the 22nd, because it's the Saudi Arabia card. I think because of the timing, I won't be able to do it live. So I made there's that, but that'll wait. Give them at least a week's notice about my schedule. They won't care that much. All right. But anyway, Saturday, come by and check out my coverage of UFC and ESPN Plus 100. All right. All right. Let's try to be quick with the news here. I've been at this for a little bit now, and I don't want to be doing this forever because I don't. All right. The big drama this last week was around Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. Surprise, surprise, right? So the UFC was supposed to have a big press conference event it was in Dublin, right? For McGregor and Chandler, and they canceled it fairly last minute, like day of. Um, Said well, the terminology was, well, we had to reschedule it. Sure you did. Um, and that spent a news cycle with a lot of people going, is that fight still on? Um, you had Dana White deflecting by talking about power slap. You had Michael Chandler doing some of those like pseudo inspirational quotes. Um, you had a lot of people coming out and saying, we no longer have confidence in this fight happening. I don't think that's an unfair position to take, for the record. There was a bit when the UFC like pulled 30, cause this is 303, right? They pulled that from the pay-per-view section of advertising. Like there was a pretty decent chunk of, hey, what's going on here? So they did run another promo for it last night. Enough people are saying no, the fight's on still, that I'm inclined to think they clearly have enough confidence to feel that they can still promote it, which means very little in a lot of respects. Conor McGregor dropped, hey, here's new sparring footage of me. We're totally fine. Never mind, that footage is clearly old. Very clearly older footage. Um, Here's the thing, okay? Let's be brutally honest about this because that's what we do here, right? UFC 303, June 29th. This is International Fight Week. If something happens to Conor McGregor, this fight card should not be a pay-per-view. Now, let's run this down, shall we? Main event, Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler. Co-main event, Jamal Hill and Carlos Ulberg. Then it's Mayra Buena Silva and Macy Chasson, Joe Pyfer and Marc-Andre Barrio. That might be further down on the card. They released the main card, and I just think a few things haven't been updated. Because I think Ian Gary versus Michael Page and Cub Swanson and Andre Feely are also on the main card. There's a few of these I'm going to have to double. But look, those are all fine-ish fights. Mayra Buena Silva and Macy Chasson is bleh. I don't care about Gary, but other people do. Hill and Ulberg is very obviously a replacement fight, and it is. If something happens to McGregor versus Chandler, especially if something happens to McGregor, you can't charge people $80 for this card. I mean, they will, because of course they will, but that's not a pay-per-view quality card. There's no getting around that. It would be a fine, better than average on paper, probably, like ESPN card. If you have to main event with Jamal Hill and Carlos Ulberg, hypothetically. That would be, for an ESPN card, we're doing okay. For a pay-per-view, not worth the money. Straight up, not worth the money. So they better be praying that McGregor is held together, because if something happens to Michael Chandler, you can throw someone else in there with Conor. But if something happens to Conor, I don't know what you do. I really don't know what you wind up doing with that. Because it's suddenly a very awful... If that's not Conor in the main event, this is one of the worst pay-per-views the UFC's put out in like years. Not ever, but probably the last 2 years. This would be among the worst pay-per-view offerings that they've put out. I mean, even now, it's not a great card. It's just you've got the only star the UFC has who's proven to move pay-per-view sales, so they don't care that much about loading it up. So we'll keep an eye on what happens to that. But that's not like that's close. That's end of this month. That's the other thing about this. Like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna pull to try? If you have to find a title fight to salvage this, you don't have a champion in play on this timetable. You unless you wanted to try and move like Tom Aspinall and Curtis Blades for the interim belt from 304. Because you're not moving Edwards and Muhammad. They're not going to be able to make weight on this timetable. Those guys should already be in camp. And I don't think that would be again a reasonable thing. John Jones isn't going to do you any favors. You could maybe throw Alex Pereira and somebody, maybe, but like you don't have. This is one of the downsides of the UFC machine currently. If you get into a position where you have to try and fill in a pay-per-view main event when you don't have a deep card, they don't have a lot of options. A lot of other stuff is already kind of locked in. So, anyway, there's that. So, good times. As a minor note, as I mentioned, we will keep you updated on that. We'll see what news comes out. At the moment, it seems most people are reporting that there's a fair degree of confidence the fight actually goes through. In all probability, what happened is Conor suffered an injury. It's not going to be bad enough to stop him from fighting if he lies about it. And then if he loses, he can say, I tore my knee up, a couple of weeks ago, and I just made it, I gutted through it for the fans, and thank you, and I would beat this guy if I was at 100%, and we can all just pretend that Conor's sycophants will agree with him, and the vast majority of us will pat him kindly on the head and tell him to, go play in the corner. So, all right. As a minor note on the news front, I mentioned previously that Jake Paul and Mike Tyson had to be scrapped for health reasons related to Mike Tyson. That has been rebooked, that entire card, which has a couple of legitimately good boxing bouts on it, by the way. If you only look at the main event, like Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, what are we doing here? That don't get me wrong, there's some freak show boxing on that card. There's some legitimate world class boxing on that card too. Like Amanda Serrano's on that card. She's no joke. So that whole thing got rebooked for November. Same venue. Um, so because Texas will still license Mike Tyson to do this, inadvisably so, but they'll do it. So that's what we've got to look forward to. Yay. All right. I think that's all I've got written down for news, so let me check Twitter one last time, see if anything crazy is broken. If not, we will do plugs and we will get out of here. All right, nope, nothing new, so plugs. I have no other podcast this week. Damn You Hollywood is a little bit of a break. Mark's got some stuff going on. There's not really anything worth talking about. Oh no, the new Bad Boys movie came out. You don't want to listen to us crap on that. You guys want to go watch that, have a good time with it, fine. Go, have my blessing, but I would not enjoy it, and it just doesn't seem like a fruitful conversation could even be had out of it. So, one more week of us not really hitting much, but that movie's doing okay financially, so thumbs up to that. Good on it. This year is going to be a rough one for the movies, and anything that can kind of help that along, I actually do think is probably a good thing. But next week we have, what the heck is it? Next week will be Inside Out 2. So, yeah, that's a thing. All right. But no other podcasts this week. Usual spate of coverage. WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC event on Saturday, and I will see you back here in a week. We will be reviewing UFC on ESPN Plus 100 and previewing UFC on ABC 6, which is the Saudi Arabia card. think that's the one I won't be able to cover live. Let me double check this. There's got to be a faster way to do this. Hang on. Hang on. There we go. Prelims. Yeah, prelims start at 10. That's just not going to work. Where's the main card start? 1. I might be there in time for that. We'll see. That's going to be a weird day for me, timing-wise. So, yeah, won't be. I don't think I'll be covering. Certainly not the main card or the prelims live. All right, but we'll deal with that when we deal with it. I will still be previewing it next week because my previews do not dictate anything other than that. And you know what? Not a terrible ABC card. Not. Yeah, it's not terrible. A lot of guys that can't fight anywhere outside the Middle East for any number of reasons, but we'll talk about it, won't we? All right, that's it for me for this week. Thank you all very, very much. See you next week. Until then, stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.